question. The distance from Port Olisar to Hurston, wow, it's like I plotted those two together, is a little less than 32 million kilometers.
Okay.
Since all of our existing quantum travel systems, drive and fuel tanks, are too small to make that trip in one hop, how many truck stops are we thinking will be along the route?
So right now, we have a test map that has Hurston where it's going to be, Crusader where it's going to be. And right now we have kind of concentrical rings that are in between there. And we have 8 rest stops on the way. So this is something that we'll be testing out, and we're using this as kind of our initial guess, of kind of how populated we need this location to be. And then from there, that's probably going to be our initial stab for 3.3, and I'm sure there will be some adjustment.
Oh yeah.
And then as soon as we go out and as soon as we release it, then with fan feedback and all of that, then I know I can guarantee you that there will be more adjustment, and 3.4 and 3.5, 3.6 kind of thing. So right now we haven't worked in this scale yet, so we're kind of building our formula and figuring out how all of this is going to work and how often you have to refuel, so on and so forth.
Got it. Now, you said the number 8, and before anybody takes it to Reddit or Spectrum and says there will definitely be 8, that is what we're working with right now in our internal testing.
Correct.
That's by the time 3.3 gets in your hands, it could be 6, it could be 12. That's part of what we're figuring out. And then once it does get in your hands, what he just said, you're going to tell us whether that's too many, whether that's not enough, whether we need to adjust how much fuel is in the quantum tanks, or whether
exactly.
It'll be a lot of tweaking.
Yeah, because I mean, I don't want the players refueling every 2 minutes.
Yeah.
I don't think that's fun. I don't think anybody's gonna think that's fun. So, let alone what's happening in Cryostra right now. So, what?
Hey everybody, this is Minion Soldier, and this is the Piracy Show. Now, of course, we found out in that Calling All Pappies from yesterday. Once again, we were reinforced, I would say, with the point that, distance and travel time is something that really matters in the Star Citizen universe. Now, this is something that it kind of slips in and out of people's consciousness. You see a lot of people making statements, certainly on Spectrum, and comments on YouTube videos and so on and so forth, all the time, where they're talking about, well, I'm just going to go get this ship, then I'm going to come get you, that sort of thing, blah, 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 blah. But it always kind of circles around the idea of travel time, the reality of travel time and distance within the Star Citizen universe. And one of the ships that I always kind of held up in the background and said, this is going to be an important ship, is the Starfarer. I've always kind of held that ship up and said, even though I don't like the interior, which is something I've joked about many, many times. I mean, it's basically like a plate of spaghetti. But the importance of fuel and the relevance of that ship to so many different types of operations within Star Citizen, I think, is something that you kind of have to keep pushing into people's vision and saying, hey, this is something that you're going to have to be aware of, because even if you go into the PU right now and you zoom the map all the way out, yeah, you see a representation of how far it is, but now it's finally coming, it's finally coming into your sphere of consciousness that, yeah, you're going to have to stop for fuel along the way. Now, that has an effect, certainly, on piracy, being if you want to go from, say, Crusader to Hurston, with your crime stat, you may not be able to. You might have to look for a way to knock off your crime stat before you can make that trip, because who knows if you're going to be welcome at those rest stops to get fuel, or is there going to be a secondary type of rest stop where they don't really care about your legal status, that sort of thing. There's a lot of complicating questions there, but even though there is that added layer of complexity for your gameplay, there's also a layer of protection in the fact that someone who wants to travel that distance and come and get you is going to have to really want to come and get you. Now, in the past, CIG has dropped the hint that they would like people to travel along trade routes. And one of their major methods of interdiction that they had discussed months ago was the idea of putting up basically a sphere, an interdiction sphere, not unlike the idea presented in EVE Online, where you would place a sphere at one particular point in space, and then you would use that to capture ships as they traveled between two defined points within the universe. Now, the big question was, when you were looking around, say, the Crusader system, was that realistically no one was really restricted to any one lane of travel. You could bounce around between different moons within that area, and you could still kind of get around these types of interdictions. So it didn't really seem like all that great of an idea, and so a lot of people didn't really feel too threatened by the idea. I myself kind of didn't like the idea of just a universal system that just snagged whoever traveled through it, but I was willing to wait and see and let it actually pan out within the universe. But now, with what CIG is saying, consider the implications of that. Let's say you have two worlds, shown here, that you want to travel in between. If you have a larger ship with larger fuel tanks, something like a Reclaimer or an Idris, something like that, then conceivably you might be able to make that jump without having to make a stop. But a smaller ship is going to have to make use of the rest stops. A smaller ship might have to hit one or two of these rest stops along the way in between these two destinations. And at that point, you're now traveling on a defined route. You're traveling basically on that trade route, which is something that they've wanted to have in the game. You're now in a predictable place, some place where someone could, say, put down an interdiction sphere, more or less, and catch you while you're traveling. Larger ships can avoid this because they might be able to make that jump without having to hit any of these rest stops, or being able to hit only one of these rest stops along the way, so they can kind of come in off axis, whereas smaller ships are going to be restricted to that lane of travel between two rest stops. Now, once again, of course, a lot of this depends on the actual distance involved, and as CIG stated, they have a few different test options that they're looking at: how close planets should be, the travel time, how many fuel stops you have to make, that sort of thing. So it's entirely conceivable that an Idris would still be forced to travel along that route, but depending on how close those places are, maybe an Idris can avoid it altogether, whereas a smaller ship like a Caterpillar would be forced to hit all these points as it travels along, or at least some of them, right? So for pirates, all of a sudden the challenge becomes, all right, what is a fair area that we feel that the smaller ships will be forced to travel down, whereas the larger ships will probably avoid? For a player, now all of a sudden this presents the idea that I could be trapped somewhere millions and millions of miles away from any conceivable help, where, say, a pirate could interdict me at this location, and then as soon as they have me snagged, they can shut the interdiction off so that even I can't escape them, but they're not accidentally pulling in anybody else. So now they have me isolated and trapped, and help could be tens of minutes away at best. You know, this kind of brings it to the forefront, says, you know, this is a problem now. This is a problem that you have to deal with. When you were looking at orgs that said, oh, well, we're going to be doing trading together and we're going to form convoys, you're like, I don't want to bother with that. Now all of a sudden the solo player who was counting on being able to operate his hull C or his hull E solo is now confronted with the fact that you might actually end up being trapped in space with just that ship and unable to do trade runs because there might be pirates operating, you know, along that route, and you don't have escorts unless you're willing to go out and hire them. This kind of brings these problems to the forefront now and says this is something that you're going to have to deal with. Now for pirates, this presents an interesting opportunity depending on how this system evolves from this basic idea of what CIG is going for. You might have to put a couple of stealth ships at either fuel station to basically watch what's coming through and say, okay, I see a lone caterpillar traveling across that route. Turn your interdiction on and interdict them. Whereas you may, depending on how interdiction works, it might take 10 minutes to spool it up, or it might take 10 minutes to shut it down. So maybe that isn't quite as effective as you'd hoped. Chances of it taking 10 minutes, though, probably fairly slim, but that's not beyond the realm of possibility. I think in EVE Online, back when I was playing, to put up an interdiction sphere, I think it was like a 10-minute countdown to get at least one of them. I think the smallest one was 5 minutes, the medium was 10 minutes, and I think the large was 15. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments below. I mean, I'm sure it's changed since then, but there was a relative time depending on the size of the interdiction sphere that you were going to put down. But, at least that's something that you can watch for as a pirate, but you're also, as a pirate, going to have to think about, how do I get fuel for my own ships out there? All of a sudden, things like the Vulcan or the Starfarer become much more important options, or much more important tools to have in your kit, or at least within your fleet. Amongst those that are in your fleet, hopefully somebody has that option available. So in the end, what do you come away from this with? Well, there's going to be varying distances. This is something that's going to be balanced over time, so it's something that's going to change, but this is something that CIG has spoken of before, that they wanted trade routes. Now, obviously, over shorter distances, this is probably not the ideal that they want, but over longer distances, where perhaps if you're trading in minerals right now or any trade goods, you might see that your profit margins are pretty weak in and around Crusader, and this probably reflects the fact that if you're traveling from Hurston to Crusader, you're probably going to have a much higher profit margin. So that may indeed be the way that you want to go as a trader, but that might also highlight the fact that you may want to invest a little time in making some friends, or at least possibly finding a bit of a social channel where you can arrange to get each other together, or to get with each other in convoys and travel as a pack together, making yourselves a much less inviting target for a pirate. Now, as a pirate, this kind of shows you that operating perhaps in deep space offers you a little bit of protection, that being the time it takes for anybody to try and interfere with your operation. Once, let's say, you've snagged a ship, let's say a distress call goes out, it gives you more time to prepare for anybody trying to stop you, or depending on how quickly you can set up an interdiction field and then bring it back down again once you've captured your target, it gives you distance and perhaps a little bit of anonymity. If nobody knows what's happening in that space, if they're just flying through it and they don't see what's actually happening, then perhaps you can get away with what you're doing, but you're going to have to think about the logistics of getting an interdiction field out into that part of deep space in between planets, and what is required to maintain it, not just in terms of fuel, but the type of ships that you're going to have to bring to make sure that you can actually stay out there and operate out there for a useful amount of time to achieve what you're trying to achieve. But of course, this is all just speculation, broad strokes ideas. This is a system that has yet to be nailed down. We're still in early alpha, but it's something to pay attention to on either side of the game. So with that, I'm going to end the video here. I hope you enjoyed it, and thanks for watching.
Thank you for watching. So if you want to keep up with the latest and greatest in Star Citizen and Squadron 42's development, please follow us on our social media channels. See you soon.